It was a cold December night in New York City, the kind where the wind whipped through the streets and even the neon lights of Times Square couldn't cut through the chill. Donald Trump had just wrapped up a high-profile gala at the Plaza Hotel, shaking hands with business moguls and political elites, flashing that signature smirk for the cameras. His limousine was waiting by the curb, a black fortress gleaming under the streetlights. But as he stepped out, something caught his attention. A few feet away, near a dimly lit alley, a man sat hunched on a piece of cardboard, wrapped in a ragged military-issued jacket. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, his hair streaked with gray, his face weathered from too many nights on the street. More noticeable than his appearance, however, was the situation unfolding in front of him. A pair of younger men, rough, streetwise types, were hovering over him, laughing as they kicked at the man's belongings, a battered duffel bag and a few scattered papers. "Come on, old man," one of them sneered. "Got anything worth tucking?" The homeless man glared up at them but said nothing. His fists were clenched, his body tense, but he didn't rise. He seemed to be waiting, measuring the situation. Trump didn't usually involve himself in street disputes. He had security for that, and his time was too valuable to waste on random acts of charity. But something about the scene struck him the wrong way. Maybe it was the military jacket, or the way the man held himself, defiant, disciplined, unwilling to show fear despite his position. Or maybe it was simply the arrogance of the two punks, thinking they could bully a man down on his luck. With a scowl, Trump strode forward. "Hey," he barked, his voice cutting through the cold night air. "You got a problem here?" The two men turned, their expressions shifting from amusement to confusion. Then they saw who was addressing them. One of them nudged the other. "Holy crap, that's Trump," he muttered. "I suggest you find something better to do," Trump said, adjusting his tie with a flick of his wrist. His tone was firm, no nonsense, the same voice that had commanded boardrooms and political stages alike. "Before you embarrass yourselves any further." The two hesitated. Even street thugs had enough sense to know who Donald Trump was. He wasn't a cop, but he had power, and power carried weight in New York. Without another word, they took a step back, then turned and disappeared down the alley, their laughter fading into the night. Trump exhaled sharply, shaking his head as he turned his gaze back to the man on the ground. "You okay?" he asked. The homeless man didn't answer right away. He just stared at Trump, his dark eyes steady, assessing. Finally, he nodded. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough but strong. "Didn't need the assist, but appreciate it." Trump reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a few $100 bills. He held them out. "Here. Get yourself something to eat, maybe a room for the night." The man didn't take it. Instead, he let out a short chuckle, shaking his head. "No offense, but I'm not a charity case," he said. "Not gonna take your money just 'cause you feel bad for me." Trump arched a brow. He wasn't used to people turning down his money. "It's not about charity," he said. "It's about common sense. You want to sleep out here in this weather?" The man shrugged. "Been through worse." That's when Trump noticed the patches on his jacket. Faded, but unmistakable, Marine Corps insignia. He glanced down at the duffel bag, now slightly torn from the scuffle. A few documents had spilled out, including an old military ID, the name barely legible under the wear. "You're a vet," Trump said, more a statement than a question. The man gave a half-smirk. "Used to be. Name's Mac." Trump studied him, then pocketed the cash. "Well, Mac, let me ask you something. You said you've been through worse. What's a guy like you doing out here?" Mac sighed, running a hand through his unkempt hair. "Long story. Let's just say life doesn't always go as planned." Trump nodded, understanding more than he let on. He wasn't one to dwell on sentiment, but he did respect resilience. "Tell you what," Trump said, stepping back. "You don't want money, fine. But I could use a guy who knows how to handle himself. Ever thought about getting back on your feet? Mac frowned. What are you saying? Trump gestured to his limo. Come with me. We'll talk. If you're as tough as you seem, maybe there's something we can do about your situation. Mac hesitated, glancing at the empty street. He didn't trust easily, especially not men in tailored suits with million-dollar cars. But something about Trump's offer didn't feel like pity, it felt like an opportunity. With a grunt, he grabbed his duffel and stood up. All right, he said. Let's see what you got. Trump smirked. Smart choice. As the two men climbed into the limousine, neither of them knew that this chance encounter would change both their lives forever. Mac sat stiffly in the back of the limousine as it rolled smoothly through the streets of Manhattan. The contrast between the vehicle's leather interior and the cold pavement he had been sitting on minutes ago was almost surreal. He had spent years toughing it out, never accepting handouts, yet here he was, riding in the kind of car he had only seen from a distance. Across from him, Donald Trump sat relaxed, scrolling through his phone, occasionally glancing up at Mac with a curious expression. So, Mac, Trump said, breaking the silence. What's your story? Mac shifted slightly, his posture still rigid, as if expecting a catch. You mean why I'm on the street? Trump nodded. Yeah. You don't seem like the kind of guy who gives up easily. Mac exhaled slowly. I don't. But life has a way of knocking you down, no matter how tough you are. He leaned back, rubbing his hands together, warming them up from the cold. I served in the Marine Corps. 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. Got a couple of commendations, even a Bronze Star. Trump raised an eyebrow. That's impressive. Mac shrugged. Did my job. Wasn't looking for glory. He stared out the window, watching the city blur past. Came back, tried to adjust. Got married, got a decent job as a security consultant. Thought I had it figured out. Trump leaned forward slightly. So what happened? Mac's jaw tightened. Wife got sick. Cancer. Insurance didn't cover half of what she needed, and I spent every last cent trying to keep her alive. His voice turned bitter. Lost the house. Lost the job because I was too busy taking care of her. She passed away 3 years ago. Trump's expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of understanding in his eyes. And after that? Mac let out a dry laugh. After that, I didn't care much about anything. Tried getting back on my feet, but the job market wasn't exactly rolling out the red carpet for guys like me. I had no family left. One bad break after another, and, well, here we are. The limousine pulled up in front of Trump Tower. As the doors unlocked, Trump studied Mac for a moment before gesturing toward the building. Come inside. Let's get you a decent meal. Mac hesitated, then followed Trump inside, past the towering golden doors. The warmth of the lobby hit him instantly, a sharp contrast to the freezing night outside. The place was all marble, chandeliers, and polished brass, too polished for a guy who hadn't been in a real home in years. He felt eyes on him as they moved through the lobby, from security guards to suited businessmen who didn't know what to make of the scruffy man walking beside Donald Trump. They entered a private dining area where a steak dinner was already being laid out. Mac eyed the food warily. He wasn't used to charity, but he also wasn't about to pass up a real meal. As they ate, Trump studied him. You ever think about getting back into work? Mac chewed thoughtfully. Sure. But who's hiring a guy who hasn't had a permanent address in years? Trump smirked. Maybe I am. Mac looked up, startled. You serious? Trump leaned back in his chair. I like guys who know how to handle themselves. You've got discipline, experience, and the way you handled those punks earlier. That tells me you're not just some guy with a military past. You've still got instincts. Mac set his fork down, narrowing his eyes. What exactly are you offering? Trump shrugged. A temporary security job. See how it goes. I've got a full team already, but some of them are soft. They've been in suits too long. You're different. Mac crossed his arms. And what do your current security guys think about this? As if on cue, the door opened and two men in black suits entered. One was a thick-necked former Secret Service agent named Daniels, the other a wiry ex-Navy SEAL named Carter. Both looked at Mac with polite skepticism. Sir, Daniels said, his tone professional but firm. You're not seriously considering hiring this guy off the street? Trump waved a hand. Relax, Daniels. Mac here has more experience than half the guys on payroll. And he's not afraid to take action. Carter smirked slightly. Taking action is one thing. Being able to function in a structured security team is another. He turned to Mac. No offense, but you don't exactly look like you've been keeping up with training. Mac met his gaze coolly. You want me to prove myself? He gestured to the empty space between them. We can go around right now. Daniels chuckled, shaking his head. That won't be necessary. He turned to Trump. Sir, if you insist on this, we should at least put him through a basic evaluation. Trump grinned. That's fair. Mac, you up for a little test? Mac smirked. I've been tested my whole life. Let's do it. Trump clapped his hands. Good. Then tomorrow morning, you'll report to my security team for evaluation. If you pass, we'll talk long-term. If not, at least you get a warm bed for the night and a good meal. Mac nodded. Deal. Trump stood, extending his hand. Mac hesitated for only a second before shaking it. As Trump's security team exchanged uncertain glances, Mac couldn't help but feel that, for the first time in years, he wasn't just surviving, he was being given a real shot at getting his life back. And he wasn't about to waste it. The sun barely touched the Manhattan skyline when Mac arrived at the private training facility Trump's security team used for drills. He had slept in a real bed for the first time in years, yet his instincts had woken him before dawn, as they always did. Old habits didn't die easily. Daniels and Carter, the two senior members of Trump's security detail, stood waiting as he walked onto the training mat. Carter crossed his arms. All right, Mac. You talked big last night. Let's see if you can back it up. Mac smirked. Let's dance. The first test was hand-to-hand combat. Carter went first, coming at Mac with quick, precise strikes, but Mac was faster. He dodged a jab, stepped inside Carter's reach, and took him down in one swift motion, locking him in a submission hold. Carter tapped out, grinning as he stood up. Not bad, old man. Daniels was next. He was bigger, stronger, a brawler. Mac let him throw a few punches before slipping under a right hook and sweeping Daniels' legs out from under him. The other security members watched, murmuring among themselves. Mac didn't just know how to fight, he knew how to win. Next came firearms training. They took Mac to the range, expecting him to be rusty. Instead, he put 3 rounds dead center in the target before anyone else had even finished lining up their shots. Carter let out a low whistle. Damn. By the time they reached the final evaluation, a simulated security breach drill, Mac had already earned quiet nods of approval. When the test began, he navigated the layout with practiced precision, identifying threats before they even had a chance to strike. He moved like a man who had spent years in the field, not one who had been living on the streets. After the drills wrapped up, Trump arrived to see the results. Daniels, still rubbing his sore shoulder, gave a small nod. He's the real deal. Trump smirked. Told you. Mac's training was one thing, real-world action was another. That chance came sooner than anyone expected. A week later, Trump attended a high-profile fundraiser at a luxury hotel. The event was filled with wealthy donors, politicians, and celebrities. Security was tight, but Mac's instincts were sharper. He had a bad feeling as soon as he entered the ballroom. He scanned the crowd, noting exits, suspicious movements, and anyone who didn't quite belong. Then he saw him, a man in a waiter's uniform, moving toward Trump with something clutched in his hand. His gait was too deliberate, his eyes too focused. Mac moved before anyone else could react. He pushed through the crowd, reaching Trump just as the man lunged forward. Mac tackled him, knocking the weapon, a small concealed blade, out of his hand. The crowd gasped as security swarmed, pinning the would-be attacker to the floor. Daniels and Carter pulled Trump back, but he didn't look shaken, he looked impressed. As the chaos settled, he turned to Mac and smirked. "Well, I think that settles it." The story made headlines. Homeless veteran turned Trump bodyguard saves the day. News outlets picked up on the dramatic redemption arc, painting Mac as a man given a second chance who had proven himself in the most critical moment. The next morning, Mac was called into Trump's office. The billionaire sat behind his desk, reading a newspaper with the attack's headline splashed across the front. Without looking up, he said, "You made me look good, Mac." Mac smirked. "Just doing my job." Trump set the paper down and met Mac's eyes. "That wasn't just a job. That was instinct, loyalty, and quick thinking. I don't want you as just another guard. I want you as part of my personal security team." Mac hesitated for only a second before nodding. "I'd be honored." Trump extended his hand. Mac shook it firmly. "Welcome to the team." Mac adjusted his tie as he stood outside Trump's office on the top floor of Trump Tower. A year ago, he had been sleeping on a cardboard box in the cold streets of Manhattan. Now, he was part of Trump's personal security team, one of the few men the billionaire truly trusted. The transition from street survivor to high-level bodyguard hadn't been easy. There had been skepticism, challenges, and more than a few confrontations with other security personnel who doubted his place. But over time, Mac had proven himself, not just through his skills, but through his unwavering loyalty. Trump wasn't just his employer anymore. He was something more. A friend. It wasn't just about protecting Trump at events or watching over him during business meetings. Their conversations had grown deeper, moving beyond security protocols and logistics. They talked about life, war, business, and the state of the country. One evening, as Trump sat in his private lounge after a long day, he gestured for Mac to sit across from him. "You ever think about what comes next?" Trump asked, sipping his Diet Coke. Mac furrowed his brow. "Next." Trump leaned back. "You've proven yourself. You've got the skills, the discipline, and the story. People love a redemption arc. You ever think about using what you've been through to help other guys like you?" Mac hesitated. He had spent so long just trying to survive that he hadn't thought much about the future. But now that Trump mentioned it, the idea took root. "There's a lot of vets out there," Mac said finally. "Guys who served, came home, and got left behind. I know what that feels like." Trump nodded. "Then let's do something about it." A few weeks later, Trump announced a new initiative, Vets First, a program designed to help homeless veterans find housing, job training, and reintegration support. Mac was placed at the helm, serving as the face of the initiative. The announcement made waves. Some praised Trump for taking action on an issue that was often ignored. Others, especially political opponents, accused him of using Mac's story as a publicity stunt. The media dug into Mac's past, searching for dirt, but there was nothing scandalous to find. He had simply been a soldier who had fallen on hard times, no criminal record, no disgrace, just bad luck. Still, the attacks came. At a press conference, a reporter challenged Trump about his decision to place a former homeless man in such a prominent role. Trump's response was sharp and immediate. "Mac's not just a former homeless man. He's a Marine, a hero, and a guy who had the guts to rebuild his life. And let me tell you something, he's done more for this country than half the people sitting in Congress." The backlash didn't deter him. If anything, it only made Trump double down. He personally donated millions to fund shelters, training centers, and mental health programs for struggling veterans. More importantly, he used his influence to bring in other donors, corporate sponsors, and political allies who could turn Vets First into something sustainable. The more they worked together, the closer Mac and Trump became. Trump respected Mac's honesty. He wasn't a yes man, and he spoke his mind even when Trump didn't want to hear it. Mac, in turn, appreciated Trump's loyalty. No matter how much political heat came down on him, Trump never wavered in his support. One night, as they walked through a newly opened veterans shelter funded by Vets First, Mac watched as Trump shook hands with former soldiers, listening to their stories. It was the first time in years that Mac had seen certain men stand tall, with hope in their eyes. "You really care about this," Mac said quietly. Trump looked at him, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "I do." Mac nodded. "Then let's keep going." Trump grinned. "That's the plan." Over time, Mac wasn't just seen as a former Marine or Trump's bodyguard. He was a symbol of second chances, of resilience. People who once doubted him now respected him. And through it all, Trump and Mac's bond only grew stronger. They weren't just employer and employee anymore. They were brothers in arms. The crisp autumn air settled over Washington, D.C., as the grand ballroom of a five-star hotel buzzed with political elites, business tycoons, and decorated military veterans. Tonight was more than just another high-profile fundraiser, it was the official launch of the Mac Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing housing, job training, and mental health support for homeless veterans. At the center of it all stood Mac, no longer a man lost in the shadows, but one who had rebuilt himself from the ground up. He stood tall, dressed in a finely tailored black suit, his Marine Corps lapel pin gleaming under the golden chandeliers. Though he had traded in combat fatigues for formal attire, the same fire still burned in his eyes, the same determination that had kept him alive on the battlefield and through his darkest days on the streets. Trump stood beside him on the stage, addressing the gathered crowd. His voice carried the same conviction that had made him a global icon. "I've known a lot of tough men in my life," Trump said, glancing at Mac with a smirk. "But this guy is the definition of resilience. He went from sleeping on a sidewalk to running a foundation that's going to change lives." He gestured toward the audience. "A lot of people talk about helping veterans. Mac does it. And that's why I'm standing here tonight, putting my full support behind him." The applause was thunderous. Mac took the podium, his hands gripping the sides for just a moment, steadying himself. Public speaking had never been his thing, but tonight wasn't about polished words, it was about honesty. "I never expected to be here," he admitted, his voice steady. "A year ago, I was just trying to make it through another night on the streets. I didn't think about the future because I didn't have one. But then someone saw me. Gave me a shot. And that changed everything." He turned toward Trump. "I don't know if I ever said this properly, but, thank you." Trump gave him a small nod, the kind that said more than words ever could. Mac took a deep breath. "I know what it's like to feel forgotten. But I also know what it's like to get back up. That's what the Mac Foundation is about, giving veterans the same second chance I got. Because nobody who's served this country should ever be left behind." More applause. Some in the audience even rose to their feet. As the event wrapped up, Mac found himself standing near the entrance, scanning the crowd like he always did. Even with a new life, old habits died hard. A familiar voice snapped him out of his thoughts. "Still on guard duty, huh?" He turned to see Trump smirking at him. Mac chuckled. "Old habits." Trump clapped a hand on his shoulder. I wouldn't want it any other way. Outside, the city lights of DC flickered in the distance. Mac had seen them before, back when he was just another nameless face in the crowd. Now, he wasn't just surviving. He was thriving. And all of it started with one moment of kindness. As he stood watch at the entrance, ensuring Trump's safety as always, Mac realized something: he was no longer the man he once was. He was better. And for the first time in years, he looked forward to the future.